Hello everyone, I'm Ben Chris, and welcome back to another episode of Ben Talks About. It's the month of October, meaning that it's very, very close to Halloween, so I figured now is a pretty decent time to take a look at this game right here, and also the fact that and also due to the fact that the game is still relevant, I decided to go ahead and give myself my quote-unquote first impressions. I say that, and yet I've had the game for a couple of days now, on the recently released Metroid Dread, the fifth entry in the main line Metroid game series, and the sequel to Metroid Fusion, which people have been waiting many, many years for, concerning the amount of games that take place before and in between those two in between the series. So yeah, this game has been announced to us quite a while ago during Nintendo's E3, and I went ahead and just talked about it during my initial Nintendo E3 video. If you want to go ahead and check those videos out, then go right ahead. But yeah, I just thought that this game would be rather interesting for a Metroid title when I first saw it, and then more trailers came out for it. We learned a little bit more about the game, what exactly is going on during the gameplay itself, and all of that. So yeah, I wanted to go ahead and give you guys my personal impressions of how I felt about the game as a whole. I'm not necessarily what you would call a overly humongous fan of the Metroid franchise, but I do think that it is definitely one of Nintendo's better and honestly a bit more underrated series. Nowadays it seems like Metroid has gotten a little bit in a sort of a renaissance recently because of the more recent games that were released ever since the release of Metroid Other M, and it definitely goes to show how much of a community the series has built up since the game originally released all the way back on the NES. So yeah, Metroid Dread takes place after the events of Metroid Fusion on the Game Boy Advance, where oh yeah, by the way, there's going to be slight spoilers, so if you don't want to be spoiled by anything in particular, then go ahead and stop watching the video now. But yeah, it takes place after the events of Metroid Fusion, where after the events of that game, one of the main villains of that game, the X-Parasites, managed to get one of its very final remains on a brand new planet, which is the one that this game takes place in. And during that time, Samus manages to crash land on the planet, and now she has to get her way all the way through this entire area to get back to her ship and escape from the planet. All the while, Samus is being constantly chased by these android-looking robots right here that are basically hell-bent on hunting Samus down. The reasons why, I won't necessarily spoil it, but it goes to show that you are going to have quite the difficult time getting away from them. So, and afterwards, it basically is the same way as any other traditional Metroid game. You still go around trying to just solving puzzles, finding secrets, and finding power-ups to your arsenal, because again, like every other Metroid game, Samus does not come with all of this stuff that you had in the previous games. But eventually you do manage to get the different power-ups that you saw during the events of Metroid Fusion. And overall the gameplay is a very fast-paced Metroid game. There's a lot more of an emphasis on combat in this title, similar to what it was like in Metroid Samus Returns, which was the remake of Metroid 2 Return of Samus for the original Game Boy. This game was also made by the same studio, so that does indeed make sense. So all the gameplay mechanics from that title are present in this title, where Samus is able to do a sort of melee counter, which allows her to stun enemies and basically give her a way to kill the enemies in one hit if your reflexes are good enough. It's definitely something that you have to get used to, because I feel like the game does really try to encourage you to use the counterattack, because otherwise some of the enemies, especially early on when you're starting off the game with none of your extra equipment, they can take quite a while to kill, and if you don't play your cards right, you're going to die a lot. However, to me, in my personal opinion, death in this game is almost like an inevitability. death in this game, especially compared to other Metroid titles, isn't as much of a hindrance because on top of having the traditional save rooms that the Metroid games are known for, this title also does a sort of autosave where after you go to certain areas, especially after you go to after you enter the rooms where the robots that try to kill you are at, it basically spawns you right where you were originally left off. So it's not like you're going to lose like a large amount of progress if you do end up dying. And I feel like the more you die in the game, the more the mechanics you'll be able to learn, and the better at it. Especially during encounters with the bosses in this game, because a lot of them have very specific attack patterns, and if you aren't able to get it down like immediately on your first try, you're going to end up dying a lot to them. But eventually you slowly start to learn more and more of how to beat the bosses more easily. And for those of you who know about the different types of sequence breaking that you can do in the game, you're able to find many secret ways to beat all of the bosses, and they can go down very easily. However, that is all depending on the amount of skill that you have. And of course, me being with the being self known as the person who dies a lot in video games, you can see that by the countless amount of Let's Plays that we've done before, where I basically am guaranteed to die an immeasurable amount of times. But yeah, eventually the game did start to get a little bit more easier when dealing with the basic enemies after you get more and more of your equipment, which I gotta say, the way they do progression in this game is, while it is still the same sort of function that the other series has been like, where you discover new items by either defeating bosses or locating the Chozo statues that are placed all across the map to give you different power-ups. The order that you get these power-ups is definitely more unique compared to other Metroid titles, because you don't get the Morph Ball until at least I want to say at least 2 hours of gameplay, which was very, very off-putting. I predicted that you would actually end up getting the Charge Beam first, and strangely enough, the first item that you get is actually the Charge Beam, and this is me without looking at the guide itself. By the way, I'm also the kind of person who did not watch any sort of gameplay videos that were released the day that the game came out, because I've only had the game for around, I want to say, 4 days, and the game has been out for quite a while at this point, so a lot of people had already been done full walkthroughs, speed runs, different ways of sequence breaking, because people are able to just work that quickly whenever a new game comes out, especially for a game like this one. But yeah, I wanted to go in with as little expectation on what was going to happen as possible, and despite it being taking quite a while for me to understand it, it did become not necessarily second nature to me, because I did end up still dying quite a lot. But yeah, it eventually got a lot more easy to go through and much more fun, especially later on in the game when you get more of your beam power-ups. By the way, I do like how the beam power-ups are structured in this game, where all of them automatically stack up with you. And some of the newer power-ups that you can get in this game, such as the beam power-ups that weren't in a lot of the previous games, like specifically the fusion beam, where if you do a fully charged shot, it actually goes through a wall, which is mostly used for solving certain puzzles. Which, in terms of overall puzzle solving, I mean, Metroid isn't necessarily the franchise that is known for being having overly in-depth kind of puzzles. It's always been the kind of thing where you bomb a specific area to unlock a passageway, or find a way to go through an invisible wall with one of your power-ups that leads you to either a secret area or leading you to another power-up that it might be an optional one that you might not have seen on your first go. Those kind of things. A lot of those are present in this game, and I feel like for some reason I've been seeing a lot of people have been trying to consider this sort of puzzle solving a bad thing, because their argument is, what exactly motivates you to say shoot the ceiling to reveal a secret passageway. I've been seeing certain discussions on that kind of stuff and whether or not that counts as quote-unquote bad game design. But in my honest opinion, I feel like if you do play your cards right, the game sort of encourages you to look for these type of things on your own, because a lot of times, especially way back when, and especially if you look at games nowadays like Zelda Breath of the Wild, the game sort of encourages you to locate these type of things on your own. And even then, the game also gives you a lot of tutorials onto how the mechanics work, and how the game encourages you to try and find like certain passages that may seem like they're being blocked off by something. I feel like the game does do a good job at telling you exactly how the mechanics work, and it's very easy to get a hold of. You might still die, but again, I feel like dying is essentially part of the gameplay itself, because I don't really understand how you're able to, especially on your first go through this without dying at least quite a number of times. Although that might be just me, because again, I'm not that very great at these type of video games. But still, I did still find the game to be extremely fun. And in terms of the overall gameplay, never before since the Resident Evil 2 remake back on the PS4, which I actually did a video on quite a while back, which is something I probably want to redo considering I've played the game a whole lot more. But regardless, the game, I feel like this game's main goal is to give you a sense of fear and a sense of tension, especially when you're trying to escape the robots that are trying to hunt Samus down. I feel like those sections were done very, very well. More specifically, when you first discover them for the first time near the beginning of the game, because afterwards it has the sort of exploitation that a lot of survival horror games sort of have. When there's one specific type of enemy you want to look out for, you begin to sort of notice the type of ways you can sort of exploit that, and if you play your cards right, you shouldn't have too much of a problem avoiding them. Although there are times, especially early on, where getting discovered by them and having to get away from their sight is, again, it's sort of a gameplay mechanic, but I do still feel like the way that it works is still done very well, because, you know, even after encountering them for like the 4th or 5th time, you know, I still got that sort of tension, like that anticipation of whether or not, you know, are they gonna discover where I am, or are they not? What way is there to wait for them to escape? When are they gonna stop looking in the same area over and over again so they can go to a different room so you can actually end up escaping? Because the exit door is right next to where you are and you barely have any health left. That's basically been my personal experience with the game. But there is always that sense of satisfaction when you're able to actually take one of them down, and especially if they give you a really, really great power-up, such as the dash feature or the ice missiles. There is a sense of gratification when you get yourself rewarded for doing that kind of a task. So overall, I do think that this was done very well. The atmosphere is definitely what I would expect from a Metroid game. I do still feel like one thing that I did sort of notice that I wasn't too keen on is that each of the areas in the game are very, very large and not necessarily spacious, but they do take a while to explore, and especially early on you're doing a large amount of back and forth going from one area to another, because you got a new power-up in a different location, so you could open this one area to find yourself another power-up, which then leads you to an elevator that leads you to another location that might have an area that you might want to go to, which may lead to a story cutscene or a boss. It feels like you're doing a lot of back and forth going through through the same areas over and over again, and with these areas being very large, and especially early on, you're gonna end up having to sometimes walk all the way across the map in order to get to a specific place you wanted to go to, and I feel like it's almost guaranteed on your first run, if you're not using a walkthrough like what I've been doing, that you're definitely going to be missing a few things like missile expansions and energy tanks to increase your health. I feel like that's sort of not necessarily a flaw, but I feel like something that could have been handled a little bit better. I'm not quite sure exactly why, but it did feel like there was a lot of back and forth, especially early on. But eventually the game introduces a group of teleporters, which can instantly teleport you to a specific area possibly in another area in a different location so that you don't have to constantly go back and forth. And especially early on, once you get specific power-ups to open certain passages that lead to these shortcuts, going through the game does definitely feel a whole lot easier. Also, one specific nitpick about the game that I personally have is that I haven't found a way to decrease or increase the sound in the game. It doesn't seem like there's an actual like options menu in the game to actually allow you to like turn the music off or make the sound effects louder or quieter. If there is some sort of way to find it, then I haven't found it personally. But I do feel like once you are able to go into an area where you're not constantly shooting enemies or trying to get away from the robots that are trying to hunt you down. The atmosphere in the game is still, I think, done very well. The music especially is I thought was pretty good, and it fit the sort of atmospheric tone that I was sort of going for, similar to what they did with the Metroid Prime 2 and 3. I do feel like it could have had a few more catchier tunes, especially ones that are possibly remixed versions of ones from previous games. So far, I've only noticed one or two tracks in particular that I recognize from the other Metroid titles, and while the atmospheric soundtrack does sort of help enhance the mood, I do feel like it could have helped a little bit more if there was a way for them to add, music that was a lot more catchy. But again, that might be because, the music isn't necessarily as loud as I want it to be. And again, there's no real way to change that in any sort of options menu. Again, at least not what I personally found. But yeah, despite that, and overall, I do feel like this game definitely lived to the expectations that it gave us. I feel like its main goal was to give you that same sort of tension that you had during those events in Metroid Fusion, and as well as the ending of Metroid Zero Mission, where you felt like you were constantly being chased by one specific threat. And I feel like the game did do that very well. And as a Metroid game, it is nice to see this title go back to a more traditional Metroid style of not knowing where to go specifically, and being able to find more and more power-ups to make the enemies that gave you trouble near the beginning of the game become nothing but death fodder for later on in the game. I do feel like the game has done it very well, and if I was able to pick up some of the other Metroid titles, I do think I definitely would. Could I recommend this as your first Metroid title? That's kind of hard to say, because I feel like this game does expect a lot of the player, because again, the game isn't necessarily easy. The game is actually pretty darn difficult, especially early on. If you are going to want to get interested in the Metroid franchise, the best game that I think to start you off with would be Metroid Zero Mission on the Game Boy Advance, which we actually did an entire Let's Play of. But that game, I think, does much better at giving you an introduction to the Metroid series. But I still, if you are a Metroid fan and you haven't decided whether or not you want to get this title, I would definitely say that I could recommend it. It is definitely a very fun title. I'm definitely going to be playing more of this after I'm done recording this video. So overall, I hope my impressions on the game were decent enough for all of you guys, and I hope you all enjoyed this video talking about it. I had a lot of fun talking about it myself. So until I see you all next time with another video that's hopefully on something relevant like this one was, I'm Ben Earth, and bye.